morning, everybody. This is Michael James with the Noggin Podcast, and today we have a very special guest, Brendan Frazier, and he's located out of Tennessee today with us. He has his own podcast he started in August of 2020 and has been consistently building, and then he's also the owner of Wired Planning. So I'd love to have Brendan introduce himself and his businesses and let us know a little bit more of what you're up to in this world.
Yeah, so I have a couple businesses as we were talking a little bit before, a couple businesses, both in financial services. So that makes it a little bit easier, because when I hear about other people that have multiple businesses and they're in completely separate industries, completely separate sides of the world, I don't know how in the world they do it, because having two in the same industry is challenging enough, but there's quite a bit of overlap. So on one hand, I'm part of a firm where we do financial planning for entrepreneurs and a lot of parents that run businesses. Just because it's a needed market that doesn't really get tapped into, that doesn't really get served by traditional financial advice world. And then the second business is it's my own kind of like personal brand business where I do some speaking, podcasting, like you said, and coaching for financial advisors. And we've just focused on all the things that we don't get trained on as far as like how to interact with human beings, how to communicate and understand the emotional aspects that go along with dealing with money, like how to connect with somebody in a way that gets them to open up to you and tell them about their life and their dreams and their goals. Because we get all the training we get all the training, we have all these designations and certifications that teach us how to do the numbers side, right? Like here's how much you need to save, here's how much insurance you need, here's what risk is in a portfolio, blah, 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 blah. But we don't ever get trained on the fact that we're dealing with emotional human beings on an emotionally charged topic like money. Until you figure that out, you can't actually be great at what you do. So, but it was one of those deals where somebody was asking me yesterday where the idea came from. And honestly, it's like classic business idea generation 101, where you go, there's a need for something that there's a need for something. Everybody agrees that it's necessary, but it doesn't exist. So financial advisors would tell me all the time that it's something that they need, they know it's important. They just didn't really know where to go for it. And so I kept hearing that over and over again and was like, all right, well, somebody's got to fill this gap. And so that's why I say classic business idea generation 101, because there was a need, there was a demand and a need, and it pretty much didn't exist. So I just kind of went out and the rest is history.
So how long have you been in with Wired Planning, and what has transpired in the last 2 years, would you say?
Yeah, so founded Wired Planning in 2018.
Okay.
And spent quite a bit of time. So this is 2021 in the fall. So it's been about 3 years.
So you had a year or two right before the pandemic hit, where you were building and getting this thing going, right?
Yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then it kind of sounds like it hit, and then I'm guessing you had to shift gears a little bit. So it'd be kind of interesting to hear that.
Well, yeah. So in fact, what actually happened was at the same time that I founded Wired Planning, I was just launching my career, or my advisory business, my financial advisor business, working with clients. So I kind of started them both at the same time. In the Wired Planning side, in the podcast, it started more as just like a side hustle, if you will, more of a passion project too. Passion project, side hustle. I don't really like those terms, because I think psychologically it does something to us where you don't really like. If I just truly thought of it as a side hustle or passion project, it probably wouldn't have grown into what it is today. So I never really wanted to look at it like that. But if you look at how I broke down my time and then where my income was coming from, like it was very much a side project there for a while. And then just like kind of kept pouring into it through 2018 to 2019. And that allowed me to kind of build the awareness around it. So it wasn't like I launched from nothing. So that's when the podcast launched in like you said, August of 2020. So that was basically like a 2-year gap where it was a side project. I was like, on social media, connecting with people, kind of gauging some interest, putting out some content there, kept sort of teasing the podcast. But the nice thing about that was once the podcast was launched, there was a little bit of a natural audience. Like some people that had kind of been waiting for it, some people that were aware of what I was doing. But the launch of the podcast is really what poured gasoline on the fire and took it from being a side hustle passion project into a full-blown like, hey, I better like figure out a way to run 2 businesses instead of 1.5 type deals.
Cool. So let me ask you, Brendan, when you were building that community, what channels were you on? Was it Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram? What were those kind of building community channels for you that led into the podcast? And what were you speaking about?
Speak meaning like on those channels
or the content. Yeah, what were you posting about, and what was building? Why were these people following you at that time? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. One that I should probably spend a little bit more time, like not only just reflecting on, but actually going back and like diving into the content to figure out exactly what it was, because it's evolved a little bit, I think. But yeah, so I started out mainly on Twitter and then LinkedIn. So on Twitter, they call it FinTwit, financial Twitter. It's like there's this community of like financial advisors that are on there that share ideas, that consume. I mean, use Twitter like most people do, right? But the cool thing about that is it's like allowed me to connect with people that I probably wouldn't have otherwise connected with. So that's more of a has more of a obviously if you're familiar with Twitter, it's like there's a learning and knowledge consumption aspect to it where you get to like learn. It's sort of like a curated feed for information. Okay. But it also, the thing I didn't account for was the social aspect where people, they're in our community anyways, they're more likely to reach out on Twitter than they are on like Facebook or Instagram, and sometimes even on LinkedIn. So that was the unforeseen benefit of Twitter. But what I eventually, this is a mistake that I made. I still don't understand how it happened. But then again, I guess, if we went back we all make mistakes, but anyways, I didn't give as much time, effort, and energy with LinkedIn at first. I'm not entirely sure why, but whatever. And then I started focusing a little bit more on how to best use and work on LinkedIn as well, because in that business, Wired Planning, it's a lot of B2B, essentially business sales, or like, content, or it's, I'm trying to educate and work with and connect with financial advisors. So they're not really interested in reading what I have to say about how to best interact with and deal with and connect with clients when they're sitting on their house at night scrolling through Facebook and Instagram, right? They're on there as their professional hat of a financial advisor, looking to make their practice better, looking to help their clients out. And they do that more so on LinkedIn than they do most other platforms. So I ramped that up once I realized that I blew it there for the first, probably 6 months or so.
Well, to be honest though, that community was not near as engaging as Twitter back then. It's been really up until the pandemic when Twitter or LinkedIn kind of like reignited itself in my mind, because it was kind of dead for those 2 years previous. And then the pandemic made it like really, really, really relevant again. But Twitter has always been that very unique community where the people that use it like hot water. Yes. And the people that don't have no idea what's going on there. So when you tap into the right communities, like that's why I was curious, like what was working for you and what wasn't, because it's not a failure, it's a timing effect in my mind. Yeah. So you were kind of building the foundation, and then LinkedIn, that now it's probably hitting for you pretty good, I would imagine. So.
Next time I feel like I made a big mistake or feel like a failure, I'm coming to you to help me soothe it over and make me feel better about it. Yeah, this is good. I like this. I'm feeling better about myself now.
Absolutely.
But no, you're right, because I like how you said that about Twitter, where it has this component about where it's like not everybody uses, like they don't have as many users, as much engagement as some of the other platforms, but the people that use it, like they use it, and like I became a big believer. Now it's, if I had to choose one platform personally for my own personal use and consumption, that's probably the one that I would choose. But awesome. 3 or 4 years ago, I would have never said that, but I kind of became a believer anyways. And then LinkedIn, what the pandemic, I hadn't thought about this, but you bring up a good point. what I'm doing on LinkedIn now may not have been possible a year or 2 years ago, because what it did, and I think what it did, at least in the financial advisor world, was it forced us to reevaluate, like a lot of people to reevaluate their business development strategy. Like it's very old school industry where people go and they're like, hey, I'm going to go out and go to networking events and try to go knock on doors and cold call people. I'm going to go out and like try to meet people, as many people as possible. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. But when there's a pandemic, you can't go meet people face to face. You have to turn to something. I think that got a lot more people onto LinkedIn, at least more actively and in a more engaged nature, which is, for a lot of us too, that also comes with the unfortunate side of getting a lot of the cold messages of people selling their services. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that. There's probably more engagement now because of that than there would have been 2 years ago.
Oh, it's industry wide. It's dental, it's marketing, it's screen printing, it's anything right now, because they're asking like who's available, what's available as far as product and services, and what's the timeline of me actually getting this and having it in play, right? Whether it's t-shirts, whether it's that business service, whether it's the advertising campaign, whatever. And so yeah, I mean, for me, I get to see it from a very unique perspective, and that's why I bring on certain guests, because they get to see it from just their industry and maybe not as wide of a breadth as I do. And so yeah, like I speak with coaches, consultants, real estate brokers, the builders, the architects, like, and to hear their mindsets behind how they're using Twitter and Facebook and all this, and then all the digital. It's really interesting. And it's funny that you say I would go and use Twitter now if I had my one channel for yourself. I actually started on Twitter myself back in the day, and how I started was answering people's questions and showing up as an expert. And then they would transfer to me and say, wow, you really know what you're doing. Could I hire you?
Really?
And I would go on Twitter and put hashtag marketing help, social media advice. And I just sat and watched those hashtags all day. And I mean, every 10 seconds there's, and I would sit there and answer questions professionally. And I did that for 3 months and then got really busy. So
the hashtag gave you the question. You would then go answer the question, and then they would
client.
They would DM you and say, hey, you sound like you know what you're talking about. Can you give me a little bit more info? But you probably weren't the only person that answered the question, right?
Well, I mean,
or were you? Maybe that's why.
I didn't see a lot of guys doing that.
Okay. Yeah,
so I mean, for me, it was a very unique process to do it, and I didn't do it very long, but that's how I started. But like LinkedIn for me, it really didn't hit until 3 years ago because of the way I was using it and networking it. Like on my Facebook, I'm 1/10 of the person I am on LinkedIn.
What does that mean?
So I have 2,000 followers on Facebook, and I have almost 12,000 now on LinkedIn. Big difference.
Okay, so
where's the money? Where's the money and revenue?
Well, but is that also a byproduct of where you're putting the majority of your effort to?
Oh yeah, it is.
Okay, so there's probably a correlation between followers and effort.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, but intentionally.
Yeah, it is intentionally.
Yeah.
And it's like if I wanted to intentionally build my Twitter crowd, because that's where I thought I was the most impactful, then I would go spend my time there, or Instagram, or whatever I was trying to influence at that time. So if I was trying to go do like this new business solid number launch, I would go work with a bunch of influencers, people that have bigger leverage and audiences and followers in specific spaces. And then I would get them to talk about it before it launches, months in advance. Like you were mentioning, like you were dragging people with a dragnet to the podcast before you're teasing it.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we would be doing with soft marketing in some ways, and kind of guerrilla marketing. So
I'm curious to ask you this, because it's a conversation that I've had a few times, just on the contrast between Facebook and LinkedIn, because you have some people that they're big believers in Facebook and what it can do for their brand and their business. A lot of it probably comes down to like, where is your avatar, where is your ideal client? But one thing I think I've found is that people are generally more open and willing to converse in a messenger format or a direct message on Facebook than on LinkedIn. It's almost like on LinkedIn, people think like, oh, you're probably just going to be on here selling me something. Yeah. Whereas on Facebook, people like actually talk to you and respond with like life stuff.
Totally. Yeah.
So I don't know if you've had that.
Oh, I have a hot knife and butter, and I test all these different theories. So like, Facebook's interesting because they don't expect you to be selling something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I never start the conversation that way through Facebook or LinkedIn either. I get to know them first. And I say, oh, I see you live here. I see you work there. I see you do these things. And then I say what I do.
Yeah, sure.
I never just dump on them and say, here's my noggin branding bullshit. No, I never do that.
Yeah. And then, so that's a platform agnostic, like fundamental approach to like being successful through it. But even if you take the same approach, what have you found if you take the same approach on Facebook as on LinkedIn, that the one that you just mentioned where you ask about them, you make a connection. Do you think the responses, the type of responses and the response rate would be the same?
I think Facebook would be quicker because Facebook, that app and that website gets used way more in most people's day compared to LinkedIn. Okay.
Yeah.
Now you said the heavy Twitter user that is camped out on Twitter all day, they're not on Instagram and Facebook. They're on just Twitter.
Right.
And just the Facebook crowd, they're not on Twitter and they're not on LinkedIn. They're just on Facebook most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's finding again that channel. And I've spent more time on LinkedIn because I'm going after a specific crowd.
Yeah. So it kind of comes back to the whole like,
it's time.
It can all be effective, but like, where is your message gonna resonate? Where's your ideal? Resonate? Yeah, right. No, I think that makes sense. And that's kind of what I've come back to. The other thing that I learned early on from somebody that's just, I guess somebody that I've looked up to and been influenced by and learned a lot from was more than anything, don't like the shiny object syndrome, right? Like don't go out there and think like, okay, I need to optimize my Facebook, my Instagram, my LinkedIn, my Twitter. Like I need to do all these and do all of them perfectly. TikTok, right? It's like, if nothing else, like just try to get really, really good at one and maybe two and learn how to do that successfully. And then pour your time, effort, and energy into that. And then maybe once you figure that out, then you can start, branching out and adding other dimensions to it. And I think if you look at like some of the people that have been most successful at it and building brands and building awareness and building an audience, oftentimes that's kind of how they do it. They don't try to start out being the best at all platforms.
No,
right.
No. Like we set up as a marketing service, like we set up the accounts, but we do focus on one or two channels and just do a deep dive.
Yeah.
Build a community and then dragnet it out and do that. But historically, that's how I've approached these things. And, depending on the industry and the prices and whatever. But it's pretty interesting. So as far as your podcast, how has that kind of transformed the last year? Have you gotten more engagement? Have you been able to bring on higher level, guests, or how has that kind of worked for you? Because globally, a lot of people are upgrading their office equipment. They're starting to do podcasts and share and educate what they have as a message. So how has that worked for you and transcribe back to your wired planning business?
Yeah, so I have to be, you might have to stop me at this point because I'm love talking about podcasting, passionate about it. I talk all the time about how it's been a game changer for me, for my business, for what I've seen is possible, right? Like, and I just enjoy doing it. Thoroughly enjoy I don't enjoy the editing, but I don't edit it. So I enjoy pretty much the rest of the process. But yeah, I mean, I think I had visions of what I wanted it to be whenever I started out. Like I figured at the very least, like it'll be kind of fun. It'll be a cool way to network with some people that otherwise wouldn't say, hey, yeah, Brendan, I do long form interviews. So they wouldn't be like, hey, yeah, Brendan, let's sit down and chat for an hour and a half. That sounds great. Be like, Brendan, I'm sure you're probably a nice guy, but maybe not, but I'm sure you're probably a nice guy. But like, I don't really have an hour and a half just to sit around and chat, and like, I get that they should say that, but like when you've got a podcast, like you get to do that with some cool people that are usually too busy to do this. So you not only learn quite a bit, but you make some cool connections. And so for me, like it's been, like I was telling you a little bit before, I've been consistently putting out episodes. It basically started in August 2020. here we are all these years later. It's you, whenever you do it, you hear like, yeah, just keep doing it, keep after it, keep producing. Rome wasn't built in a day, but they laid bricks every day. Just keep putting out. The content game's hard. Sometimes it'll feel like nobody's listening, but just keep doing it, and the growth will come. And it's one thing to know that in your head and to hear that, but it's another thing to like cling to that. And then at times where you're wondering like, did anybody even listen, to like believe that it could grow? So been fortunate enough to watch it grow month after month, just kind of see like the interest grow, the downloads grow, the listeners grow. And it's always fun to like have people reach out and tell you like, hey, just found your podcast. Can't believe I didn't find this earlier. Hey, just found you. Thanks so much for doing this. So it's awesome. Led to a bunch of connections that, you know, otherwise wouldn't have been made within the financial planning and advice community. And then one thing I mentioned too is the thing I didn't, it's obvious now, but the thing I didn't expect at the time is like, I'm having people reach out from Australia, like New Zealand, the UK, you know, and it, like, there's something that you go like, man, when you start realizing you're having an international presence, you kind of go, dang, that's kind of cool. Totally. But the thing I would say, I wanted to mention that you mentioned earlier is one of the things that's been most helpful for me is you mentioned associating your brand with like an influencer in a certain space, right? So I recognize and readily recognize and always remind myself that even though it's my podcast, even though it's, you know, got my name on it and I'm sort of responsible for the promotion and getting it out there and growing it, like the guests are the lifeblood of the show, right? Without these guests, it wouldn't be where it is today, because what I've been able to do is have some great guests on it in our space, some like well-known guests to financial advisors. And so I'm like, I've not only been able to like associate myself and tie myself to them in a way that like builds some credibility and authority, but also it taps into their audience too, right? It's like, oh, if that guy was willing to go on a podcast with Brendan, right? Well, then Brendan must, like, it might be something I need to look into. So whenever I started, it wasn't like I wasn't just launching a bunch of individual episodes. It doesn't mean you can't do that or you shouldn't do that. There's a bunch of people that do that successfully. I can only speak to the interview-based, guest-based shows. But like, you start doing that and people start posting about it, or they'll start telling their audience about it. And it's an audience that has, I'm talking to people that are, so we're talking about the podcast is called The Human Side of Money. So like, for example, we had somebody on that's a behavioral finance expert, right? So that's a lot of what we talk about is the behavioral aspect of money and the behavioral aspect of finance. And so he's this well-known guy in the behavioral finance world. And now they're like, oh, he's on a podcast that talks about behavioral finance. So because they're already following him, they're interested in the topic. And so that naturally builds a little bit more of an audience that way, I think.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And when you gave that example of, you know, tapping into influencers in a space, like there's no doubt in my mind that that's been a part of the success, part of the growth is like that format, right? And so that's why I always remind myself that the guests are the lifeblood of the show, because the show, like the quality of the show has to do with, you know, their presence and the information they're giving you. It also has quite a bit to do with whatever reach it's grown to, right? So just something that I have to remind myself, and I'm thankful for, and try to thank them all as much as I can, especially those that were willing to take a chance, you know, early on and be on some of the first few episodes and when there weren't as many listeners. Now people go back and download old episodes all the time, right? But yes, and then to answer your last question, at this point, it's come to the point where now some of the guests that I would have reached out to initially that may not have agreed have now heard about it in the industry, right? Like they've had friends that were on it or friends that have mentioned it to them.
Pre-qualified.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like I can reach out now with a little bit more brand equity, name awareness, and so it makes it a little bit easier conversation. I'm still trying to get to the point where I can get like big guests that like a lot of people would know. So but that's, you know, it's something to work for.
Yeah, it's building that foundation, and it looks like you've done a great job. So as far as my guests, what would they get out of your show? What's the length, and how could they utilize your coaching services if they were interested in working with you?
Yeah. So the only guests or the only listeners of this that would get any benefit from listening to the show is if you are a financial advisor or financial planner. But I tell people all the time, like friends and family, they're always like, oh, you have a podcast. That's cool. I'm going to listen to it. I want to listen to it. I'm always like, okay, thank you for your support. I appreciate your eagerness. If I'm doing my job right, you're going to listen and you're going to be extremely bored if you're not in this industry. Like the power of knowing your audience and who you're talking to, who you're speaking to, right? So I always tell them that. I'm like, listen, thank you. But if you're actually interested, it probably means that I'm not doing a good job. Like, well, it needs to be a message catered specifically to the target intended audience. So unless the reality is that you're not probably going to be very interested in the podcast unless you're in the business and you're in this industry as a financial advisor, financial planner of some sort. But that being said,
we do speak with and work with many firms.
Okay, cool.
So,
well, in that case,
it could potentially be thousands down the road. And that's why I'm building my foundation, is because not today 1,000 listeners are going to hear this, but in 3 months, there's going to be 10,000 advisors we'll be in front of. So
yeah, that's a great point. But yeah, so that's the message there, is just, that's who it's intended for, and very specifically targeted towards. That's also, it was a way that I was more willing to take the risk of podcasting, knowing that it was a very niche market that I was familiar with.
Early. Like, yeah.
Well, I see. I've been listening to podcasts for a while, so to me, it feels like it, was late to the game. Probably was late to the game. But the point being is that I kind of felt like, I'm going to go in kind of small, like in an industry I'm familiar with. It felt like less risk, I guess is kind of what I'm saying. But then anybody that's an entrepreneur, parent, somebody that's got either a family, they're an entrepreneur, you're a parent, you've got businesses that you're running or a business that you're running, and you're high. I always say our clients on the financial planning side they're high on responsibility and short on time. Like they're always thinking about how to prioritize the vital few over the trivial many, the highest and best use of their time. Totally. And they recognize that, managing their family wealth and getting that organized and protected and accelerated is not generally the best use of their time. So they say, hey, I could do this, but I'd rather have an expert do it, because generally the most successful people in the world are the ones that realize that you can't do everything. And when you look at somebody, you go, man, how do they do all that stuff? The people that you look at and you're like, man, do they ever sleep? The answer is almost always like they understand the power of leveraging other people and delegation and spending their time on the things that give the highest return. So that's who our clients are. The people that realize that, recognize that, and know like, hey, you guys are probably better at this than me, but even if you weren't, like my time is still better spent elsewhere.
Do you notice that your current customers are at what level of income and up would you want to be speaking in front of and be working with? Like for me, it's a certain price value, and I'm sure for you as well, to save you time. So what would that kind of look like?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. So, and I get it. What I usually say is that it's not fair to necessarily tie it to a certain income level, but the best way to say it would be if you're at a point in your life where you're not trying to break even anymore, where you've got some profits, you've got a little bit of a discretionary income that you want to figure out how to maximize and do the best that you can with, right? Like you're kind of to the point
block a few times.
Yeah, right. Like you're to the point where you're like, all right, yeah, I'm starting to I'm not just paying off, like barely getting by, paying my expenses. I've got this, some extra money now. I need to figure out how to allocate it, what to do with it to get for the highest and best use, not just same concept as your time, but how to highest and best use for your money. That's usually where people start getting in touch with that, or just, certain family events. Like a lot of times it'll be, and I'm guilty of this too. I usually don't do things until like there's a big event or transition that forces me to do something. But like a lot of times I'll let people reach out and they're like, hey, we just had another baby. We had a baby. Or
congratulations.
Yeah. Or no, I didn't.
Oh,
we had people. No. Oh. We had people. That's when people will reach. Those are the people that need to reach out or want to reach out, because it's hard to put an income number on it, because there's so many different dynamics that when you're running a business, like revenue versus income versus what shows up on your tax return. So I'm just kind of trying to give a few an idea of like, when you get to the point where you're trying to figure out what to do with your money, because you're not just paying off expenses anymore. When you have a life event like having a baby, starting a business, starting another business, divorce, like that sort of thing. That's usually,
you're describing it to the people that are going to get it when they hear it.
Yeah.
They
exactly.
know themselves, right?
Yeah, that's right.
People are aware of themselves at that level. So
yeah, I think that's,
and that's who we like to work with. It's, that's who's in the network, and that's who we're referring and, partnering with. And
yeah.
we're not the one providing the ongoing service or underwriting this, or so it's the partners that we're trusting and we're pulling in, and we're just the connecting piece. So that's all it is. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. You're educating and then connecting and keeping it ongoing with the relationship. So
cool. Right, very much. I mean, that's a lot of the time that's what people want. What they'll pay for is
totally
somebody that's there to give them, to offer some advice, give them a roadmap, but then also like connect to other people that they need to be connected with.
Mm-hmm.
Whether
now
it be
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, whether it be in our world, it's always like, hey, do you know anybody that a good tax strategist, right? Do you know a good attorney or estate planning attorney? Like, it could be any of those. Those are usually the people that we're helping to connect people with. It's because, again, the high on responsibility, short on time. Our thought process is we want to be like a go-to person for somebody to say, hey, this is what I need. Do you what should I do? Can you help me find somebody that can fill that gap? Because I already know, like, and trust you. Mm-hmm. So I trust that you work with people that are like you, that place a high priority on delivering results and being responsible and responding. Anyways, all those sort of things that go into it. But yes, to your point, like, being a connector is a big piece of it when you're dealing with people that don't have a lot of time, but they've got a lot of things on their plate,
or know where to look or who to contact, and they're not familiar with that space. So we're kind of like a red carpet introduction, and we try and like smooth that process out. Most people are intimidated to talk to financial advisors or bankers because historically they haven't had the best relationships, and they haven't gotten what they needed. And so we're trying to break that barrier down and make it a little bit easier, a barrier of entry to get in and work and build and scale. And hopefully people can hire more employees and get to the next location and expand that marketing and do all these things, and then do the financial and all that on the back. So right?
That's exactly right.
And that's why we are trying to have those conversations and fill those relationships, so they can catch those people that say, hey, who do you know? And I say, you got to talk to Brendan. He's the boss in this space. Right. That's exactly right. So that's why I'm trying to do this and pre-qualify, and we're doing it in an organic way, and I have certain relationships, you have certain relationships. We're all trying to leverage each other's networks and visibility and gain traction in our own spaces. And so I'm pulling on CEOs, business owners, thought progressive leaders in their spaces, people from accelerators and incubators, and try and get the whole, like, the concept from even the back end of the funding, the bankers and financiers we work with. So we're trying to have, like, the entrepreneur's mindset, the servicing mindset, the funding mindset. So I'm trying to go for, like, a big podcast at some point. I'm starting very small, but it'd be cool to be a Joe Rogan at some point, or people know you for certain conversations. So we'll see.
But don't they all start small?
They do.
As far as I know, I could be wrong. Every podcast before it's launched has 0 listeners.
Most people if you think about Joe Rogan, most people don't know him. They've watched one of the episodes because of the amazing guest.
Yeah, right.
Think of the Elon Musk episode where everyone knew he smoked a joint.
Yeah.
A billion people knew about that. It affected Tesla's stock price, for God's sake. Did you see their Twitter account the day after? It was on fire, man. So, that's... I like to play in that. I think it's hilarious. And I watch this stuff, and because anyways. So for me, like, it's been fun to start my podcast, to bring on other experts in their fields, and build out these foundations so people in their networks can catch referrals and be educating these people as they get closer to those higher levels of income, or their businesses performing at those levels. So
no, I think it's awesome. I think it makes a lot of sense. And like I said, I'm a big believer in the platform, and there's studies out there, and I've heard other podcasters say that there's something about, like, the audio format that connects with people in a way that other formats just don't really do, you know.
It's true.
As there's a level of intimacy that's hard to compete with on, especially through a blog, but even compared to video, like a lot of times people will sit down and watch a 5-minute video, right? But and there's like some connection there, but like when you're in somebody's ear while they're walking their dog or in their car for 30 minutes or and well, hopefully they listen more than that, because my episodes are way longer than that. So or like, you know, you're at the gym or whatever, like there's something to be said. There's something formed there that doesn't necessarily get formed in a 5-minute video, right? I'm not saying video is also super powerful, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, like, there's something about it
format,
right? There's something about it that I don't know how to explain, but I've seen it happen too. No, it's cool, and it's fun, and it's been, like I said, it's been a game changer for me.
It's interesting that you said the you felt late to the game in the podcasting, and the way that I've, just kind of seen this as an outsider, is not an expert in that at all, but it seems like the people that had a personality and an audience or a community, they were the originators in that space. Yeah. And now you see the listener going, oh, well, I do kind of cool stuff too, and now they're starting theirs. Right. And like I work with other service providers that build podcasts and monetize, do all this stuff. And they're like, dude, since the pandemic, the numbers are off the charts. People have been buying computers and chairs and, all this stuff. And he's like, it's phenomenal. Yeah. Because they're at home and like they have these, audiences that are kind of stuck at their house at the moment. So, captive audience in a way. So, people aren't going to movie theaters and watching the new thing. They're watching the new Netflix show and they're binging it. But after, they're like, well, what is this guy up to? So, they're looking for that little next dopamine hit in a way, and like, oh, what's the next thing I can get and, listen to or get some engagement out of? So,
no, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, I bet the sales of microphones, right? Like the headphones. I'm sure they're
two this year. So
exactly. And so I think it's important to say this. What's funny is, if you've looked, have you seen some of those stats out there about like the longevity or the perseverance of certain podcasts, and like what it takes to be in the top like 10% based on downloads and stuff?
It's insane.
It's insane meaning
multi-millions.
Wait, no, hang on. So this is what I was going to say, is if you look, the number of podcasts that actually like continue producing more than 10 episodes is like minimal. So like there's like everybody, seems like everybody's starting a podcast, right? This is something people reach out and they say, hey, Brendan, I see you have a podcast. I'm kind of interested. I'd like to know like your insights. What should I do? Like one of the things everybody says is like, seems like everybody's starting one. Like, am I too late to the game? Or is it just going to be like noise in the midst of all these other people? And it's like, I mean, first of all, I can't guarantee the success of your podcast, but the one thing we know is that there's a big pool of people that are starting, but the vast majority, and I wish I had the numbers, it'd make for a much more compelling case here, but it's like
95% are going to not.
Yeah, it's
go
like
past 10 episodes or something.
It's basically like that. It's right in that ballpark. Yeah. And then it's also like to be in the top, I want to say these aren't going to be exact, but they're going to be close. And I don't like giving non-exact numbers. I just don't have them in front of me. But if you look at the top 10% of podcasts get like, I think it's 500 downloads within the first 2 weeks. It's not even like insurmountable. It's not even like, hey, the top 10% have 50,000 downloads. It's like, no, just being the top 10%, all you need is 500 downloads within 2 weeks. And it's like, well, that seems doable. Right? I mean, or at least in my mind, it felt doable. I was like, I think I can do that. Yeah. And I'm in a super niche market, right? Like I've only got like a certain number of people that would even be interested. Totally. But yeah, I think it just comes down to sticking with it and not giving up. Because I think what a lot of people do is they'll listen, or they'll put out a few episodes, see that not many people are listening, and go, okay, never mind. And it's harder to do than you think too. It's got a low barrier to entry as far as getting it started, right? Like just buy a mic, buy a computer, maybe some headphones, go to Fiverr, have somebody do some artwork for you. Start hosting it and post it and start posting. But like, there's a little bit more that goes into like, even if you're doing individual episodes, like get prepping for it. There's prep work if you have guests. It's like, it takes a little bit more work than you think. So that also, I think, serves as a barrier to perseverance, because you're going like, eventually you're like, okay, that's a little bit more work than I thought. Not many people are listening. I'm out. Right. Yep.
Well, you've probably seen also the stats and numbers on content creators, influencers on Instagram and YouTube, and it's how many views they have to get to make a few dollars. And, is that sustainable, right? You have all these RV YouTubers, the van life and all that, and they're getting millions of views, but they're like, our paychecks are nothing. We're barely living.
Yeah.
So the average YouTuber is making a penny off of an episode, and the good ones are making, say, $50 an episode, or it's very minimal.
Yeah,
and they're getting huge exposure, and they've even got brand deals and partnerships, and they're still making nothing. So that has been a big reality check, and like you said, most people will drop off, right? The influencers that are actually making money and doing it, they're consistent, they're growing it. 99% fail. So it's probably almost similar to the number of business startups that start up and fail and actually succeed in the first 3 to 5 years, and it's probably similar.
That's a great point.
It's in the high 90s.
I bet I bet you're right. If we looked, it's probably just like that. I mean,
it's probably similar, yeah. And it's the same as the podcast, the influencers, the successful business people, right? It's all that top 3 to 5 or 10% that's killing it, and the rest is just making it work.
No, I think it's interesting you say that. I bet there is a pretty close parallel there between like the number that's sticking out and last in business or podcasting, and
so I mean it's probably there's some correlation, but anyways. Now, as far as you, Brendan, what do you like to do for fun? What do you like to do to relax? Get out of the business space and just chill with the family and friends? Or
this is one of those questions that kind of like I get a little bit nervous about because I don't have a good answer, but I wish that I did have like a good, fun answer. It's like really kind of boring. But like, so I've got 2 businesses, 2 kids, and a wife, all of which I'm like determined to be really, really good to excel at. Not that I am excelling at, don't hear me wrong. But like I want to be great at being a dad, a husband, and running these businesses. Like that's important to me. So you start putting together your time blocking, putting together your calendar, and you kind of go, whoa, hang on, that fills up quite a bit of time. So I have to be intentional about like creating my own space, right? And then you also like, psychology tells us, the psychology work tells us that like a healthy life also involves like social relationships with friends and community. So you figure, you need to build some of that in too. So I don't have a ton of free time. I guess I'd say that first and foremost. But when I do try to prioritize it, basically like when I get to the point where I can do my own thing, I don't really feel like doing anything. So I essentially just like sit there and watch a lot of sports. Like I'm a big sports fan. Then a big, I have fun with like fantasy football and the DFS stuff. And so awesome. I like watching sports. I like consuming some of that content because I'm competitive. So I like, trying to win and doing that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm either watching sports, this is on my own time, by the way, watching sports, trying to compete at something in some way, shape or form, hanging out with friends, or probably listening to another podcast.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So
awesome.
You'll probably regret asking that question because that's literally not fun at all. But I mean, I see my time as like my restorative time. It's like
for sure.
Whenever I have that time, it's like, okay, this is my time to sort of like get my mind right, get my energy back, because everything else that I do, I'm giving it out. Right.
Yeah, like, exactly. You're a big giver and supporter, and right. And you want to show up as the best you can in that time. And so to show up as loving, supportive, and caring, right, it takes some energy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
You can't show up with a low battery and the wife is going to feel it the same and the kids are going to feel it the same, and same with customers and clients. If I show up in a meeting and I'm 25%, they know. Yeah, right. Yeah. Are you sick? Like, what's the matter, Mike? You look purple today. So I'm just joking, but you know what I mean. So.
Yeah, you look purple. You may have something more serious going on.
Cookie Monster, get a hold of you. What's going on?
Right.
So, no, just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I show up with a certain level of energy, and people know me for that. It's a branding thing, right? Like, if I go to a coffee shop, they know me versus the guy next to him because of how I dress, the way I show up. My energy is a different aura than the next guy next to me. That is for dang sure. So if I go to the bank, I meet clients, I do anything, it's, I show up with a certain level of energy, and I try and make it a fun transaction. I try and be memorable to whoever I'm interacting with, and it's more fun for me that way, instead of to show up like, oh hey Brendan, man, hey let's do another podcast. Like, it's a waste of my time and your time if I show up like that. So I try to show up and have fun, make it engaging. Like, how could I maybe do some future business with you, educate other thought leaders in your space, and then maybe in 6 months I'll be like, hey, I got 1,000 dudes that might want to hear that podcast now. So
yeah, that's right.
So, for me, I'm relationship, long-term value-based, things like that. So
I think that's personal preference or my personal opinion. I've been wrong before, believe it or not. My opinions have also been wrong at times. Don't tell my wife that.
Really?
But personally, from everything that I've learned, gathered, experienced at this point in life, it seems like that's the winning formula, or like the closest thing to a surefire formula for success is taking the long-term view and the long-term approach.
Totally. Yeah. Most of my clients said, Michael didn't pitch me up front. He got to know me. He got to build the relationship. And then they said, hey, could you do this for me? And that's how I've gotten the bigger clients and the clients that last a lot longer. And they don't sit there and pray, where'd my money go this month? So little different situation. So, startups are fun. We have a space for that. But, where I make the most impact and I get to see the most influence is bigger entities now, and community projects, and, doing all this marketing and finance stuff. So that's why I'm going to be able to see more of my work. And with you get to see the families. They get to have more money and travel and, live a better life, and, have their kids live a better life too.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up with parents that, gave me money or planned for that. And, I'm hoping that I can do that for my kids, obviously, and I will be. But, most people don't even have that opportunity in life. And so you're able to educate and say, well, you do make this. Here's how you could start saving and be, financially aware and abundant at some point. So, and then maybe make some future moves. So.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say this because I think it's important, and a lot, because it's a lot of what I talk about on the podcast and with other advisors. It's like, it's easy to get caught up in like the technical strategies of what to do. Like, here's how much you should save. Here's a tax strategy to save more money. But like, ultimately the most important thing, the most valuable thing you can do is help to align somebody's capital, their money, with what's most important to them. So align their capital with their values and the goals that they have for life, because anything other than that, it doesn't really matter. Accumulating a bunch of money doesn't really provide fulfillment and happiness and satisfaction. It's how you allocate your money in accordance with like your goals and your values that actually yield that. So to me, that's like the biggest. It's not how we do it. It's not like, hey, we've got this investment, we've got this process, we've got this system. It's like, those are all important means to the end being making sure that your dollars, your money are aligned with the things that are most important to you in your life. And anything short of that's a failure. I don't care if you have the best investment that gives you 10x your return on your money. If you're not using it, if you're not spending it to live the life that you want to live, it's pretty much irrelevant. Totally. It doesn't matter.
Well said. A lot of people think like, say the Bitcoin space or, any of their investments in the stock market, they think they get the 10x return and they get this big win, but they don't do anything with it. Like it sits there, and they don't allocate it after that win. And that's where, they could, do a lot of things differently. And so anyways.
Yeah. No, and I get like, there's something to be said for like making the money to be able to spend, right? Like, but if you make them, so it's not just making it and not spending it, it's also making it and then not using it in alignment with your vision, your goals, and your values, right? Like, and that doesn't mean that you can't go and buy like a new car. That's not what that means. But what it does mean is like, there's more to it than just making the money. And that's where a lot of people fall short. Is a lot of people, especially in our world, they just think like, oh, hey, if I can just like, show somebody how to save more, how to make more, how to earn more, and how to protect it, like that's all that matters. It's like, no, you could do that, but like at the end of the day, are you fulfilled if you're going home at night doing that? Or would you be more fulfilled if you were showing somebody how to do that and helping them live a better life and using their money, using their finances to live a better life?
That's cool. They're involved in watching their money work, right? And get to take them to that next level.
And it ties them to a deeper purpose too,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
We've all probably heard of Simon Sinek's work on the power of why, right? Like to get somebody to do something or to stick to something or to move on something, give them a real like fuel behind it, like help somebody discover their why, and that's a game changer. So that's, I mean, to your point, that's a big piece of it, is helping people uncover their why, because most people just simply don't take the time to think through it. Most people don't sit down long enough to go like, hey, you know what? One of the most important things to me in my life is doing meaningful, impactful work. Right? And it's like, but once you know that that's important and you identify it as important, it becomes a lens through which you can view all of your other decisions, right? So now, like when you have a big decision to be made, you can go, hey, do I want to do this? It's like, well, meaningful, impactful work is important to me. This job pays more, but this job, I get to like actually impact lives. Yeah. If you go with the higher paying job over the one that aligns with your values and in who you are, you're not gonna have the same level of satisfaction. So you have to know that first and foremost. And most people just simply don't do the work to discover what those things are, to know what to use as their lens and as a filter for making decisions like that.
You're very right. Like even as I was graduating college, like 90% of my graduating class didn't know what they wanted to do after their business degree was completed. They all just thought they were going to go start making $100,000. And I was like, well, where? What are you interested in? What company? Are you going to start your own, or are you going to be the employee? And to start at $100,000, that might take you a few years. And, so they had painted these pretty pictures based on our teachers and whatnot. And, we were reading out of textbooks. We were not on social media and websites, unfortunately.
Right.
Kind of
sad. You learned it. You learned what to do, but you still hadn't done it.
No, and neither had the teachers.
Yeah, well, that's another. Yeah, that's right.
That's another conversation. Yeah. Anyways, well, Brendan, I really appreciate you being a guest today, and you are a very special guest. Remember that. I want to give you a high five and qualify you as that today, buddy. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing about Wired Planning and your podcast. Yeah. I'm going to add all of your links and information down below so people can contact you, hopefully sign up or learn more about your businesses and services down the road. And if there's any last comments, I'll let you have the floor here for the last few seconds.
I think I got it all out. I think I did.
Awesome.
I mean, nothing's striking me as something that I feel like I need to depart with, but I do want to say thanks for having me. It's been a blast. Enjoyed the conversation. Happy to do it. And I mean, anyway, impressed with the work that you're doing. I appreciate you letting me be a part of it.
Cool, man. Appreciate it. You have a great rest of the week, and we will be sharing this with our different platforms, and we hope you the best with Wired Planning and your future podcasts. So thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Brendan. Take care.